So I think it goes without saying that Marvel is a titan in both the comic book and film industries. The MCU is the highest grossing film franchise of all time, and I think it's pretty common knowledge that Marvel Comics are one of the highest grossing American comic book publishers ever. So I'm going to skip over an unnecessary monologue or wankery about how influential both divisions of Marvel's company have clearly been. But it tends to feel like these massively popular characters, and their even more popular film adaptations, have always been there, after so many years of being used to Marvel dominating the box office. In reality, there have been so many scrapped films, TV shows, and scripts leading up to where we are today, it's fucking insane. But it's always interesting to think about what might have been, and where things would be today if certain films that were proposed for these characters actually came into fruition, at least in my opinion. So today I'd like to show you all some cancelled live-action projects that you might have never heard about before. Of course, in the age of information, I can't guarantee you haven't heard of any or even all of these projects before, but I figured I'd at least focus in on some cancelled projects that don't seem to get talked about as much as others. I mean, I'm not going to make the millionth Spider-Man 4 or Amazing Spider-Man 3 video, why bother? So in any case, let's take a look back at some abandoned live-action Marvel projects that you might not have known about. Quentin Tarantino's Luke Cage and Silver Surfer. So these aren't really cancelled films, more so an abandoned idea in a rejected script, but it's still a pretty cool and intriguing topic that I realistically will only have the opportunity to discuss in this video. Anyways, if you weren't aware, Quentin Tarantino, one of the most famous and influential directors of all time, was a big Marvel Comics fan growing up. Specifically, Luke Cage was his #1 favorite character, and he actually referenced the Silver Surfer in Reservoir Dogs, showing a Silver Surfer poster hanging on character Mr. Orange's wall. It was actually after Reservoir Dogs that Tarantino pitched the idea for a Silver Surfer movie to a German film studio named Constantin Film. Supposedly, he had a full 500-page script written and ready to go, but he was shut down basically from the start. It seems as though the cost to produce the VFX necessary for Norrin Radd's cinematic debut was just too much to justify the project getting greenlit. At least Constantin Film were still involved with Marvel afterwards, though. It was around this time, that being after the completion of Reservoir Dogs, that Tarantino was considering a Luke Cage film as well. Tarantino talked about his ideas for this never-to-be project on an episode of Amy Schumer's podcast, 3 Girls, 1 Keith. Speaking of the project, he said, "It was after Reservoir Dogs, it was before Pulp Fiction, and I had thought about doing Luke Cage. Growing up, I was a big comic book collector, and my 2 favorite comic books were Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, later Luke Cage, Power Man, and Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. I also liked Werewolf by Night, that was a great one, and Tomb of Dracula was great. But my absolute hero was Luke Cage. What actually dissuaded me from doing it was my comic geek friends talked me out of it, because I had an idea that Larry Fishburne would have been the perfect guy to play Luke Cage. And I'm talking King of New York era Larry Fishburne. But all my friends were like, no, listen, it's gotta be Wesley Snipes. And I go, look, I like Wesley Snipes, but Larry Fishburne is practically Marlon Brando. I think Fish is the man. And they're like, yeah, but he'd have to get in shape in a big way. Snipes is that way already. And I go, fuck that. That's not important. Fuck you. You ruined the whole damn thing. See, guys, shitting your pants hard enough does cause filmmakers and studios to bend to your will. The Daredevil and Black Widow TV show from 1975. Just in case you didn't know, Daredevil and Black Widow were a couple at one point in the comics. Might give a little more context as to why a Daredevil and Black Widow pairing would be proposed for a TV show to begin with. But yeah, a pitch for a Daredevil and Black Widow television show was put together by Angela Bowie in 1975 for... Wait a minute, Angela Bowie? That Bowie? Yeah, that's right. David Bowie's then wife is the person behind all of this, and the person who would have been playing Black Widow in this proposed TV show. Yes, she apparently got the rights to these characters from Stan Lee, and then put together this photo shoot with actor Ben Carruthers as Daredevil to try and shop around to TV networks to pick up. The costumes were actually designed by Natasha Kornelkoff, the same person who designed the classic Ziggy Stardust costume for David Bowie. So, Natasha designed the costume for Natasha. How fitting. When asked about this little venture into Marvel Comics on the Daredevil fan site, Man Without Fear, Angela Bowie had this to say: "Thank you for your interest and email. I am surprised that you asked me that question. I received permission from Stan Lee to have the rights to Daredevil and Black Widow for a year. We were unable to place the series. Actor-writer Benny Carruthers and I did the photo shoot with Terry O'Neill and Natasha Kornelkoff, costume designer, and Barbara Day, makeup, in London, and that was all that ever happened. Unfortunately, at that time, it was considered too difficult and expensive to film, special effects, etc. It's also interesting to note that Angela Bowie tried doing the same thing with Wonder Woman from DC Comics. It's cool that the Black Widow design looks like it was ripped straight out of the comics. On the other hand, Daredevil looks rough. There's no telling what changes could have been made to the characters' designs if this show actually happened, but I have to question why they would leave Matt's eyes exposed, and why there's a lack of DD on his chest. Come to think of it, why is everyone so damn scared of that logo? Crazy how only one of the 3 live-action Daredevils that did happen ended up getting the classic DD emblem. The Spider-Man horror film directed by Tobe Hooper. In 1985, film production company Cannon Films, famous for classics such as Masters of the Universe, Invaders from Mars, and Invasion USA, had been optioned a 5-year period from Marvel to make a Spider-Man movie. They had until April 1990 to make a Spider-Man film before the film rights reverted back to Marvel. When Cannon Films owners, Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, bought film rights to the Spider-Man character, they got to work developing the film and gave screenplay writing duties to Leslie Stevens, the creator of the Twilight Zone-esque TV show, The Outer Limits. So naturally, Leslie Stevens penned a script that follows all the same beats and plot points of the classic Spider-Man story that we all know by heart today. Of course, Peter Parker is a photographer who mutates into a giant spider at the hand of the fan-favorite villain Dr. Zork, as Zork is carrying out his comic-accurate plan to build a race of mutants.
A race of atomic supermen!
And of course, just like in Stan Lee's run, Peter keeps mutating back and forth between humanoid spider atrocity and a regular human being until he's feeling like his life might be better if it was ended. All Zork fans would have guessed that he's ultimately captured by Dr. Z for the climax of the film. Of course, in typical Zork fashion, Dr. Zork tries to convince Peter to be the king of his mutated army after kidnapping him, in which Peter refuses and has to fight off the army of evil mutant Zorkoids that have been made until the day is saved. Now, if you're wondering what the fuck I'm talking about, that's because Leslie Stevens was tasked to write this script based on Cannon Films owners' personal impressions of who Spider-Man was. Their impression being that Spider-Man was quite literally a Spider-Man. Yes, the owners of Cannon had absolutely no idea what Spider-Man really was, and literally thought it was a sort of sci-fi horror type of character that went through awful mutations in the same vein of the classic Wolfman movie from 1941. I don't believe they ever read a Spider-Man comic in their life, so believing they had a horror film on their hands, they got horror legend Tobe Hooper to direct this spider body horror film. However, Stan Lee and the boys at Marvel saw this piece of shit script and did not let it go through. Thank God. After Stan had basically told them, hey, this is just not the same character that we optioned out to you, Canyon had completely abandoned the body horror script and restarted the project, reworking the script into a much more comic-accurate story involving Doc Ock. Of course, this movie never happened either. After Tobe Hooper directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which was also a Cannon film production, his contract was fulfilled for the company, and shortly thereafter, Cannon Films started going through a major financial crisis, ultimately never giving Tobe Hooper a chance to actually direct a Spider-Man film with Cannon. Of course, Cannon never made a Spider-Man film, period. I will say, this film does actually remind me of not only the multiple times we've seen Peter mutate into a spider-like being, but also Edge of Spider-Verse issue 4 from 2015. Though that Peter was noticeably less noble of a person, I still get a similar horror sci-fi-ish vibe. And honestly, since we don't have to worry about this being the first ever Spider-Man movie anymore, it could actually be a cool project to adapt in some way, shape, or form. This is coming from someone who likes horror, though. James Cameron's Wolverine and the X-Men. Before James Cameron was set to make a Spider-Man movie, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, he was actually going to do an X-Men movie in 1989. The film actually started its development in 1984 at Orion Pictures. The script was written by Gary Goldman of Big Trouble in Little China and Total Recall fame. The film wasn't completed before the rights reverted back from Orion to Marvel in 1989. Of course, this is the same year that Tim Burton's Batman was a smash hit, and the interest in superhero movies had started to really gain some momentum again. So Marvel, with the newly regained film rights to the X-Men, approached one of the biggest sci-fi blockbuster directors of all time, James Cameron, to help make this film. Though Cameron was actually only going to produce this film, his then-wife, Catherine Bigelow, would have been the director. The movie would have featured Kitty Pryde, Cyclops, Wolverine, Magneto, Professor X, Nightcrawler, Angel, Mastermind, and Jean Grey as its star mutants. It's interesting to note that Jean was dead in the mainline comics at this time, after the iconic Dark Phoenix storyline had taken place, so X-Men legend Chris Claremont actually tried getting Jim Shooter to revive her in the books so that she would be alive in time for the movie's release. So what was this movie going to be about? Well, the film would have opened up with Kitty Pryde being saved from a gang attack by Wolverine, who then recruits her to be a part of the X-Men. He then brings her to the X-Mansion to meet Charles Xavier. It's here where she also meets the team: Jean, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and even supervillain Mastermind. Don't worry, he wouldn't have stayed a good guy throughout the film. The script outlined pretty faithful renditions of the classic mutants, which was actually kind of rare for a lot of those early Marvel live-action projects. We would have seen a good amount of Danger Room training early on in the film, which is really cool actually. I mean, we barely saw it in the Fox films. We get a sense that the team is like a close-knit family, spending time together doing chores, eating meals, and even grocery shopping. We're then introduced to the film's main antagonist, an anti-mutant industrialist named Thomas Prince, who intends on becoming the President of the United States through plutocratic means. Prince ends up persuading Mastermind to leave the X-Men and join him in his anti-mutant adventures. Mastermind then uses his powers of illusion to frame the X-Men for various acts of domestic terrorism, which causes an angry mob to come after the X-Men at Xavier's mansion. All of the X-Men are captured during the kerfuffle, except for Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, who managed to escape. The X-Men are then put on trial and ultimately sentenced to death in Thomas Prince's giant military compound, where they're kept shackled to crucifixes. When Wolverine and Kitty Pryde come to save the X-Men from the compound, Prince, who is actually a mutant, uses his magnetic powers to cause Wolverine to basically hack and slash himself to death. And yes, this Prince character is revealed to be a mutant with magnetic powers who isn't called Magneto. Why they would do that, I have no clue. Anyways, fake Magneto orders his henchmen to bury Wolverine's chopped up corpse, and Kitty Pryde is now kidnapped alongside the other X-Men. Eventually, Wolverine heals, escapes his burial site, and goes back to save the X-Men. A final explosion-packed action scene happens at the military compound, and Wolverine kills fake Magneto. The end. What a movie. We also apparently were not going to get the X-Men's costume, which is like, why the fuck is everyone so weird about the costumes? Apparently Chris Claremont was on board to help with casting the film, and he wanted Bob Hoskins to play Wolverine and Angela Bassett to play Storm. He was inspired to pick Hoskins for Wolverine after seeing him give a convincingly angry performance in the 1984 film Lassiter, as he shoves a visibly taller actor, Tom Selleck, out of a door while verbally assaulting him.
You scum! You don't come to a man's home!
In case some of you aren't familiar with Bob Hoskins, he's a 5'4" actor who's been in tons of movies. You might know him for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or even the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Yeah, Mario would have played Wolverine. I wonder if John Leguizamo would have played Sabretooth in the sequel. As Chris Claremont recounted in a 2012 Columbia University panel, when Chris and Stan approached James Cameron with these ideas for an X-Men movie, Stan somehow ended up asking if James Cameron had any interest in Spider-Man. James started growing excited and passionate as he discussed the wall crawler with Stan, and just like that, the unmade X-Men film had gone out the window. So did the Spider-Man film too, of course. 1998 Hulk movie. In 1997, Jonathan Hensleigh, who was the screenwriter for Jumanji, writer and director of the 2004 Punisher film, had written a screenplay for The Hulk, in which he would also make his directorial debut. The basic premise for this film involves Bruce Banner working for a space travel corporation called Amalgamated Dynamics, who are trying to colonize Mars. Bruce's job is to get humans physically ready to adapt to life on Mars. He's using 3 death row convicts named Deacon, Hector, and Novak as the first people to experiment on. He's combining gamma radiation with the DNA of insects and a hummingbird on these convicts to try and prepare their bodies for the historical mission. During these experiments, the convict named Novak tries escaping and ends up fighting with Banner. They end up destroying the gamma reactor that Banner was using, and after it blows up, all 3 convicts and Banner himself are covered in gamma radiation. After all 4 people are hospitalized, the convicts manage to actually escape and flee to a nearby motel, where police show up shortly thereafter and surround the building. The convicts start mutating into the insect and bird-like creatures as a result of Banner's various tests and gamma explosion that had just taken place. We cut to Bruce Banner, who is back at his lab, deciding that he's going to show up at the motel to aid in retaining the mutant trio. While on the road, Bruce experiences his first Hulk out after getting into a car wreck, I think. After this point, Hulk would have ended up stumbling upon a bar full of rednecks for his first battle, and then he would have not only gotten around to fighting and defeating the 3 mutant convicts, but he also would have been chased by the military throughout all of this. Eventually, Banner evades the military, and the movie ends. Bruce Banner would have been played by Billy Crudup, who was Dr. Manhattan in the Watchmen film from 2009, by the way. Gregory Sporleder would have played Novak, and Lynn Red Williams would have played Deacon. After some management changes at Universal Studios and the budget becoming too high to take a risk on, the project ultimately met its end after almost a year of pre-production. Of course, Universal ended up making the Ang Lee directed Hulk film in 2003 instead. Since then, we have seen concept art drawn by artist Benton Jew, and special effects artist Steve Johnson has released some video footage and photos of the special effects made in pre-production for the film. The special effects crew would have combined practical effects such as animatronics and prosthetic makeup with CGI to bring the Hulk and Bugman to life. Apparently, they even made a Super Hulk animatronic that stood over 30 feet tall. Now that's insane. So to be honest, the story doesn't really sound like it would have been good, though I do like that the motel the mutated convicts flee to is called the Bates Motel in the script, as I'm a huge fan of the Psycho franchise. But the animatronics that were made for this movie look and sound like they would have been incredible, based on what we've seen and what Steve Johnson has described. By the way, shout out to Supervoid Cinema's video for clearly and concisely laying out the timeline for the production history of this project. That really helped me out. The Incredible Hulk vs. The Amazing Spider-Man 1984 television movie. The Incredible Hulk television series that debuted in 1977 and ran for 5 seasons through 1982 was really the first highly successful live-action project that Marvel Comics had. Starring Bill Bixby as David Banner and Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk, it was super popular in its day and has served as an introduction to the character for many people. It was a TV show that stripped the character of many of his comic book trademarks, as showrunner Kenneth Johnson basically fucking despised comic books. It wouldn't touch something like a supervillain with a 10-foot pole. So between realistic budget expectations and Kenneth's disavowment for comic books, some pretty major changes were made to Hulk's character and mythos. There's no gamma bomb in the desert. Instead, Banner's gamma incident basically happens in a quiet, failed experiment in his lab. Hulk's strength has been lowered to basically Captain America levels, as to give the audience more of a believability factor when it comes to his powers, as well as budget restrictions. He couldn't speak at all, as to avoid the brutish, silly dialogue of the comic counterpart. His name was changed from Bruce Banner to David Banner for being too alliterative, but Stan Lee and Lou Ferrigno have also both said that the name was changed by CBS because Bruce Banner sounded, too gayish. Wow. Don't think I need to explain why that's awful. Ferrigno has described this as the most absurd, ridiculous thing he had ever heard. Also, Kenneth Johnson wanted to change the Hulk skin to red from green originally, as he thought it made way more sense for a character whose main trait is anger to turn red. Thankfully, Stan Lee didn't let that happen, though it is crazy to think about the idea of a Red Hulk being conceptualized nearly 50 years ago. But despite all of these changes, the show actually churned out some pretty good stuff. Bill Bixby is still a fantastic Banner, and Lou Ferrigno was the Hulk for an entire generation. The show also dealt with really human and grounded problems. You really cared about David Banner, and all of the trials and tribulations he was trying to help not only others overcome, but himself as well. Though it might be a kick in the nuts for a die-hard Hulkster that wants some comic accuracy, It's a pretty cemented piece of pop culture history that's beloved by many. Sure, the special effects and fashion did not age well, but the heart of the show is still as good as ever. Also, The Lonely Man is such a fucking good theme for Bruce Banner, dude. Before this television show premiered, a certain other Marvel character made his live-action debut. Yes, in September 1977, a pilot episode of The Amazing Spider-Man show, starring Nicholas Hammond, made its own television premiere. And it was pretty damn successful too, just not the kind of success that CBS wanted. See, the show was CBS's best-rated program of the week with its pilot, but only amongst a young children's demographic. It really didn't make a mark at all on any kind of adult demographic. It was even the 19th highest-rated show of its entire season, but again, only amongst children. CBS really didn't want to have a show for children, so they didn't give the show a proper release schedule going forward. And after only one season, the show was canceled in 1979. CBS didn't want to be known as the superhero network either, seeing as how they were already airing Wonder Woman and The Incredible Hulk, and had already aired Captain America and Doctor Strange. There was also the problem of the show being highly criticized by fans for completely stripping it of any supervillains from Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, which happened for the same reason there were no villains in any of the Hulk episodes, because the showrunners didn't want to make a comic book show that resembled a comic book.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
Funnily enough, it was the complete disregard of any comic bookiness that actually made it less relatable than its source material. So much so that it not only pissed off fans, but Stan Lee himself. Yeah, Stan Lee was definitely not a fan of the show, since he thought it never focused enough on Peter Parker's problems in life, like his financial struggles, or the fact that his secret identity always ends up destroying his social life. He also didn't like how humorless Peter's character was when compared to the comic books. Nicholas Hammond himself has acknowledged how he thinks that Stan Lee didn't like the show because of the lack of supervillains as well. I find it funny that Stan actually praised the Hulk TV show for all of the reasons he criticized the Spider-Man one, though the Hulk has always had a bit of a darker and sadder tone to it than Spidey's general adventures have. Also, Spider-Man has like the best rogues gallery in all of comics, only challenged by Batman's rogues gallery, so it is pretty insane to just not utilize any of that. I can see why Stan didn't like the mishandling of Peter's characterization as well. His witty and relatable personality is a huge part of his character, although to the show's credit, they did have some comic book accurate elements to it, namely, Peter being a photographer that works for the Daily Bugle, and the fact that he still had his iconic tech on him, like the web shooters and spider tracers. Anywho, Nicholas Hammond was actually friends with Bill Bixby, and he once revealed in an interview that a phone call in 1984 sparked the development of the two leading men's shows getting revived and crossing over for a two-part special. This excerpt of that interview is quoted in Lou Ferrigno's book, My Incredible Life as the Hulk. I used to know Bill Bixby quite well in those days. Anyhow, we used to speak on the phone once in a while, and we talked about the problems the Hulk series had ran into and why Spider-Man didn't work. Bill asked me during one of these conversations, would I play the part again? My response was, only if I could have more control over the character. I wanted to make him more humorous and was interested in doing more of the physical stuff. I felt one of the problems with the series was that the Peter Parker applied and the Spider-Man, who was played by a stuntman, were so opposite, and lots of the believability of the character was lost. Bill liked my ideas and said that he would let me know if anything came up. About 3 weeks to a month later, I got a phone call from Bill saying that he had spoken to screenwriter Ron Satloff and he was close to setting up a deal with Columbia Television to start work on a project which featured both Spider-Man and the Hulk. Bill was going to direct, and I was to have writing credits with Stan Lee and Ron Satloff. One of the main problems early on, though, was Universal Television weren't prepared to let Columbia have use of the Hulk character, and this took a while. Eventually, Bill phoned again, saying that both networks came to a deal to co-produce the telemovie, with Universal having the rights to screen. Things started moving quickly, and we got most of the technical crews from both original series on board, and the movie had an air date of spring 1984. I was very excited because work had been tight, and as Bill said, this could open doors on the acting front. I also loved the character. Bill Bill was also keen to do it because his private life was in something of a limbo, and directing the movie would have really taken his mind off things. The most impressive thing about the movie was to be the costume I was going to wear. It was to be the black costume used in the comics around this time, and it looked a lot better than the one in the TV series. Just as everything was running smoothly, Bill phoned again. "Hi, it's Bill, Nick. I've got some bad news. The project has been cancelled. Lou is unavailable. Universal won't do the movie without Lou. Lou Ferrigno is in Italy making a Hercules movie and wouldn't be available to make the movie, and they weren't prepared to wait for him. Personally, I have always thought that this was Universal's own way of cancelling the project. If they had just left it to Columbia, it would have gotten made easily. I was a bit upset because I was looking forward to doing it again, and the script was good, and I never got the chance to work with Bill. A shame, really. Of course, Lou Ferrigno went on to state in that same book that he was actually never contacted by Universal to do this project. You know, The Incredible Hulk did actually get revived for a trilogy of TV movies in the late 80s, all of which Bill Bixby did direct. The first installment featured a guest appearance from Thor, played by Eric Allen Kramer, the dad from Good Luck Charlie, and the second one featuring Daredevil, played by Rex Brown, and a bearded kingpin with sunglasses and hair, played by John Rhys Davies, who played Sala in Indiana Jones. I gotta say, man, I fucking loved these TV movies. I know they're slow-paced, low-budget, and real damn cheesy, but they just give me a cozy feeling whenever I put them on. This is, of course, entirely due to nostalgia, as I used to watch them a lot on DVD as a small child. But I would have loved to have seen one of these things with Spider-Man in it, especially in the symbiote suit, which is my favorite Spidey costume. I wonder if it would have looked similar to the one Scott Leva had worn throughout the 80s, which is what's on the thumbnail of this video. She-Hulk 1995. So now that we have all of that context and basic history of the 70s Hulk show, we can delve right into the history of this cancelled She-Hulk project. So as aforementioned, the Incredible Hulk series had a trilogy of made-for-TV movies that started in 1988 and ended in 1990 with the death of the Incredible Hulk. The version of The Death of the Incredible Hulk that we got featured a pretty standard Bixby Hulk story, in which he tries curing himself of the Hulk while intervening forces get in the way, but this time the Hulk dies at the end of the movie. Originally though, She-Hulk was supposed to make her live-action debut in this TV movie. For unknown reasons, she was written out of the script completely before filming. Although it is important to note that the Wikipedia page for The Death of the Incredible Hulk states that She-Hulk would have actually appeared in a fourth TV movie sequel called The Revenge of the Incredible Hulk. In this film, Banner would come back from the dead and essentially turn into Professor Hulk, or Smart Hulk, as some people know him as. The film would have also featured a cameo from Tony Stark and Iron Man. Interestingly enough, apparently Iron Man would just be a robot that Tony Stark would control from a remote location. Now that sounds like a 90s Marvel TV show if I ever heard one. The page cites an unnumbered issue of Comic Scene magazine as its source for this, according to both the Lost Media Wiki and a book called You Wouldn't Like Me When I'm Angry, a Hulk companion, written by Patrick A. Jankowitz. In 1991, they tried to bring She-Hulk to television, but this time in a pilot for her own series. Apparently, there was about 12 pages worth of script filmed for said pilot, mainly of David Banner, that took place on the Virgin Islands. Yeah, I guess he's still alive? The Lost Media Wiki says it would have been revealed that he faked his death. I mean, that sounds absurdly stupid, but whatever. Anywho, the story would have shown Jennifer Walters to be a DA on vacation who ends up bumping into Banner on the Virgin Islands. Yeah, the two wouldn't have been cousins in this film like in the comics. She gets shot by a hitman who is sent to kill her by a corrupt businessman that Jennifer was trying to expose, which is why she was on vacation in the first place, as things were heating up a bit for her due to this expose. Then Banner would have given her a blood transfusion to save her life, and the She-Hulk would have been born. So what happened to this project? Well, apparently ABC didn't believe that the lead actress who was going to play Jennifer Walters, Mitzi Capture of Baywatch fame, would be a strong enough actress to carry a whole television series. They tried recasting the role to Melissa Gilbert, and then volleyball player Gabriel Reese, but it just didn't work out. Supposedly Reese wouldn't have accepted being painted green, and wanted to be painted golden instead. Oh, okay. Apparently New World Entertainment, who was the production company of this, and basically all of Marvel's television projects at the time, got tired of a never-ending search for a lead actress, and scrapped the pilot entirely. entirely. Since Bixby died from prostate cancer only 2 years later, the project was definitively done for. But New World Entertainment still owned the rights to She-Hulk, so they tried one more time to get a live-action project off the ground. This time, it would have been another TV movie. They hired Larry Cohen, director of B pictures such as Return to Salem's Lot and It's Alive, to pen a script for the project. Currently, we have no available information on what the plot would have been. This time around, She-Hulk would have been played by Bridget Nelson, who was most famous for playing Red Sonja in the 1985 movie Red Sonja. She is also an ex-wife of Sylvester Stallone. They were married at the time of this project's development. There were promotional stills taken of Nelson in the costume and makeup you see on the screen right now in hopes to attract backers for the film, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. The project once again didn't get made, and She-Hulk wouldn't make her live-action debut until nearly 30 years later. Now I gotta be honest, this looks fucking terrible. Honestly, so did the Thor and Daredevil suits from the other TV movies, but at least Thor resembled a Viking. Even if that's not visually accurate to the Marvel Comics version, it's still somewhat accurate to the original Norse culture that Thor originates from. And yeah, Daredevil was inexcusably horrendous at the time of that film's release, but the Man Without Fear suit has made it retroactively feel accurate to the character's canon. These images of She-Hulk, on the other hand, look like a really cheap cosplay of Batman's Poison Ivy. Why is she a pale green with visible dark green lipstick and a costume instead of just having green painted skin? Truly one of the weirdest Marvel movie what-ifs I can think of. So, that does it for this video. What do you think is the most interesting of these scrapped TV and movie ideas? Let me know in the comments. Speaking of comments and engagement with my videos, I have to thank you all so much for making that Spider-Man Iceberg video blow up. I really didn't expect it to get so much traction, and it means a lot that you all seem to like it so much. So stay tuned for more videos, and if you haven't already, consider doing the whole like, subscribe, and sell your soul to me stuff that every YouTuber has to beg of their audience. Until next time, though.